Alright, hey folks, thanks for your patience. I appreciate it. We're finally going to talk about the color filters and the sharpening options that I've applied using the GeForce experience. So you do need the overlay that comes with the NVIDIA drivers, the GeForce experience. You don't have to use any of the game optimization options or anything like that. This is simply part of the overlay. So when you install the overlay and press Alt-Z, that's how it brings up all the various keyboard shortcut options, other recording options if you want to get into those things, but you need it regardless to be able to press Alt F3 and bring up the color filters and the sharpening options, especially the ones I'm applying here. So they're not applied now in any way. I'm going to walk you through each of them that I've applied and what setting I'm using one by one, and I'm going to express the on-off difference as I go through them in order. So I'm going to start with sharpening with no other options enabled. Then I'm going to go to color, which is one of the categories. So each of these are categories. You have sharpening, that's a category you're going to add, little plus sign by each one of these things to add it to your list of applied options. When you hit Alt F3, it's pretty obvious. Anyway, I'm going to add sharpening, then I'm going to add vibrancy, and then as part of, as part of brightness and contrast, that's the other one that I'll walk you through. I'm going to apply exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, and gamma. Okay, but right now we're just going to talk about the first one, which is sharpening. So I have this enabled to 100% just to express the difference, but that's not what I'm using. I'll share that in a moment. Okay, so they are on, off, on, off. And it's not a matter of jagged edges. When you apply sharpening, if your resolution is at least reasonable, something like 1440p, 1080p, I think you could still get away with some sharpening in a game like this. It already has fairly clean edges. And if you're applying other graphic settings that kind of smooth the game out, you have your 2x on for anti-aliasing, then it ends up looking really great. So if you look at the details on his shirt, off, on, off, on. Now I don't quite like it so sharp, so I keep it at 75%. So here, let me go ahead and apply that. And one other important option. So here's what all I've done. The filters were off, there were none applied. So when I hit Alt F3, there was nothing on the list. What I was doing was toggling them with a shortcut I set up, Alt G, doesn't matter, shortcut that I set up to go back and forth to express the difference. So when it's off, what I would have to do is click Add Filter, go down to Sharpen, click on that, it'll add it to a list, and I'm in one of 3 presets, and then I change the Sharpen slider when I expand the category to 75%. The other important factor is ignore film grain 100%. So I won't get into the details on that. Just you could slide it on and off. It makes it look much worse. It doesn't sort of blend together the sharpness somehow. Might have to do with how they're accomplishing sharpening in the first place. I'm not sure, but it looks so much better with 75% and 100% for ignore film grain. So now we're going to leave it applied as we go through the next set of options, right? And really, I should probably move to a different part of the map, but what we're looking at is sort of brightness and contrast, and having contrast between shadowed textures, but still not lose the shadows themselves. We don't want to crush any blacks, so that's our goal. And excuse me, we're going to go into color, not contrast and brightness. We'll do contrast and brightness third and last, since it's the most detailed category. Okay, so this is a good map because it has sort of these dark and bright segments. This looks fine. This looks good, but I'm really bored by these colors. I like things to pop. Everybody's got a subjective opinion on this, and people are different, but I like colors to pop. I want to be taken on a ride when I play a game. So let's add color. Let's add some color. Now there are different color options in that category. Tint Color I'm not using. Tint Intensity I'm not using. I have temperature up, maybe 0.5 or 1. Actually 2, let's leave it at 2. I have temperature at 2. And then Vibrance I have at 40.7, but it's 40. Okay, so this is with color options on. Remember, this isn't improving sort of shadows and contrast. Off, on, off, on. Now it's sort of a subtle difference with color. Once contrast and brightness come in, it'll be a lot more pronounced. But even here at the pool, you can see with the blue how much better it looks. Sharper, more vibrant, sharper, more vibrant, sharper, blurrier, sharper, blurrier, sharper, blurrier. Okay, let's get into the last category, and this is the biggest, most featured category, I think. It probably has the most effects involved. Exposure, that's number one. So exposure I have at minus 10%. I'm going to put them all at 0, and then we're just going to calibrate on the fly here. So I have the category applied, but everything at 0. So let's look at that. I'm not even sure that it's doing much. Off, on, off, on. Off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on. Blue sky, off, on, off, on, off, on. Okay. So the first category is exposure. I'm going to put that up at 100. You can see pretty obvious, untenable. That just goes and washes everything out, or I don't know what it whitens everything out. I don't know what you call that. Either way, it's impossible. So I actually have this as a negative category. I get a little bit more depth out of decreasing it by about 10%. So let's look at that. There we go. Okay, so that's the first start, but that's not good enough. You notice the gun sort of is getting maybe a little too dark. Maybe it's a little too dark in here. Not sure, but we're getting there. So that's exposure as the first category under brightness and contrast. Next category. Contrast, 31%. And that is looking intense. So we have a big difference applied here. The gun has disappeared into the black abyss. You can barely see it other than its shape against the horizon. Off, on, off, on. Okay, so now we need to make up for what we just did. We're starting to get there. You can see so far we have color at 40%, or excuse me, at 40 for vibrance, temperature at 2. We have sharpening at 75%, ignore film grain at 100%. And then third, we have exposure at negative 10% with contrast at positive 31%. So maybe, and it also depends how bright your monitor is. You know, some people, they might set this up and think it's a joke on their monitor, just because of, yeah, I like a low brightness setting on the on-screen display. That's what I'm using, 15 out of 100 with a very dark rim. For you, it's going to be different. So what you can see and I can see and make out are two different things. So we're going to ignore highlights. It doesn't really add too much. And we're going to talk about shadows. So I'm going to do shadows at negative 100 just to express the difference. Okay, remember how we made the contrast what we made it. We made it 30%, and exposure negative 10%. The gun was starting to disappear. So I just put shadows at negative 100, and it sort of brought everything back into perspective. Pretty nice. But it kind of overcorrected. So that's off, on. But this is the first time I'll say, after adjusting contrast and then adjusting shadows, where we're already at a point where this looks better than the regular setup, despite having shadows at something like, and as egregious as, negative 100%. So we're already looking better. Now we can see we just did too much with shadows. So let's bring that down to something like negative 20% as a starting point. And then we have gamma, straightforward gamma. I think everybody knows what gamma is. I'm going to put that at 15%, and I'll walk you through every single setting as they're applied in just a moment. Okay, so this is pretty close to where we want to end up, and then we can tweak from here. And it's going to depend on you. off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on. Okay, so let's go into a shadowed area. Aha! Need to restart the map. We could do a different map actually. Why don't we do that? Maybe Piccadilly, as I did that before. Just a pro tip on this game: if you're having trouble, walk. Trust me. Don't run. Use your smoke. Game setup. Piccadilly. Off, on, off, on, off, on. Okay. Might be able to get those shadows a little darker. We're going to find out. Alright, so I've dialed shadows down about 6%. Excuse me, 4%. And I'm going to go through the list one more time. So these are the final results. This is what I was showing on Piccadilly. Off. Yuck. I can't even believe this game got out the door with how washed out things can look with full-blown anti-aliasing options enabled. But here we are. That's why we're using the filters. On, off, on, off, on, off, on. You look at shiny things or colorful things, that's when you notice the most. Okay, so nothing's really crushed. What I mean is blacks aren't crushed. You can actually make out where people might be in shadows. You know, you're never going to see as much as you might see if you had brightness fully regulating how you set up your colors and your contrast and everything. But I think this is a very good compromise to be able to see everything, have your TV look a little bit more like a traditional flat panel Samsung or something like that, LG, and not look as much like an IPS that it is with anti-glare coating. Okay, so we're going to walk through the options as I've applied them to get to this point. I'm going to go through them in order of what I feel is importance by category. So I'm only using 3 game filters. The first one is brightness and contrast. They're together as a category. Under that category, I've changed exposure to -10%, contrast to 31%, shadows to -14%, gamma to 15%. That's the category. The second category I've enabled is color. Just color by itself. Vibrance is at 40.7 and temperature is at 2. The other 2 categories, Tint Color and Tint Intensity, are at 0. The third option I've enabled is Sharpen. Sharpen is at 75%. Ignore film grain is at 100%. And I think that's all she wrote. So I appreciate your time. Like I say, I'm not much of a YouTuber. I don't make these videos for an audience most of the time. I'm just trying to memorialize graphics that I enjoy or a game that I enjoy so I can refer back to it and reminisce, and also share some videos with some friends who maybe haven't played a certain game. So I appreciate some other people showing up here and asking me questions. Maybe in the future I'll make content that's more commentative or goal-based material. I'm not sure, but thanks anyway for your time. If you'd like to see anything else specifically, or if you have any questions, I'll probably see you in the comments section.